Okay, so here's our standard. Explain the importance of agriculture in Antebellum, South Carolina, including the plantation system and the impact of cotton gin on all social classes. So, this part of this lesson is basically about slaves. Now, as you probably know, most of the South is based on slaves and plantations. I didn't show you this map because I didn't pull it up in your class, but there's two things here. One is the makeup of Southern society. Now, this is not South Carolina because, yeah, very few, and that's what you can see here, is there are very few free African Americans in the South, period. 2% of the population. The majority was still white, but a large percentage of African Americans. Now, of course, South Carolina back then would have been more 50-50. But today we're learning about what that culture in the South was like, a lot of the slave culture. And I never showed you this map either, because I did not have it pulled up. But what is the number one cash crop grown in the South back then? Cotton. However, what's still grown in the coastal areas? That's right, rice. And just like we learned, what's grown up in Virginia, the famous Save Jamestown, tobacco. But cotton was king, as they said in the South. And of course, who was buying that cotton? The North, yeah. The northern mill owner that we learned about in a previous lesson. Good job, Gabriel. Now, the northern mill owner, that's right. So, agriculture. What's agriculture mean? Farming was the basis of Southern society. Of course, and we already learned this, but it doesn't hurt to go over it again. The headright method, plus the availability of slave labor, led to large plantations. And I ask you what led to large plantations? Most of the time, it is the headright method. Even though I covered this again, I want to continue with it. Even though South Carolina had the highest percentage of slaveholders in the nation, most South Carolinians were subsistence farmers. What was the percentage of slaveholders in South Carolina? Anybody remember? Was it big? It was the biggest. It was the largest in the country, but it wasn't that big. So, anybody remember the fraction?
2/3.
What was it? It wasn't 3/5.
3/7.
It was a measly little. Okay, South Carolina was the winner here. They had the most people that owned slaves, but it was only 1/5 or 20% of the population that owned slaves. And most slave owners were not ultra-rich. They only owned one or two. The remaining population, I mean, it's probably less than 80%, because we're going to learn there were people that worked on the plantations that didn't necessarily own slaves. But somewhere around 80% did not own slaves and were subsistence farmers. Now, and very, very few, we're talking about way less than 1%. owned large plantations. I'm not leaving, I don't think. Oh. Hold on. I gave it to Mr. Plaza. I have no idea where it is. Yeah. Why is the table squeaking? Okay? I think that it could be stopped. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking. I can't find it. Alright. Alright, so. Cotton, of course, was the #1 thing grown in the South. However, as we learn, cotton wears out the soil, wears out the land. You can't grow anything all the time in the same spot. You have to do what's called crop rotation. I wasn't planning on doing this. Let me show you this picture from the thing. From the PowerPoint. I mean, I plan on showing it to you later, but this seems like a good time for it. Okay, PowerPoint, open up. Anyway, where's that picture? There it is. Okay. So, cotton wore out the land, but all crops will wear out the land. You have to plant different things in different places year to year. If they planted, next time you're looking back there, you're getting detention. If you planted rice here one time, you kind of have to do rotation. You have to do what's called crop rotation. Rice is difficult because rice grows in a very select environment that's, you know, it's pretty much like a swamp. But if you plant corn here, you need to kind of grow pumpkins there next time because it just can't grow the same thing in the same place over and over. Now, this was especially true with cotton. Cotton, though, pretty much ruined the soil. Without artificial fertilizer, you could not grow cotton over and over. So, for that reason, South Carolinians were an advocate for, and anyone who grew cotton, write that on your paper, westward expansion. In other words, we need to keep going west and find more lands. Oh yeah, that would be hard to do because you can't see it. Because whenever I turn on the PowerPoint, it messes up things. There. Better. Sorry. They were an advocate for a westward expansion. Turn off this. Cotton wears out the land. And, of course, if South Carolina slave owners and other slave owners want to expand west, they want slavery to expand west also. Get rid of that line. So, this is just one of the parts, but this becomes one of the main reasons for the Civil War, is because arguments over the western states, should they be slavery, should they be free? This increases sectionalism, because southern states want the western states to be slave states, but northern states want the western states to not be slave states. All right, there's a little line about this westward expansion right here. Now, of course, as Gabriel told us, the textile mills of the north in England were the ones buying cotton. There's where as far as economics goes, what words describes if that's who's buying or wants the thing? It's not supply, it's demand. Demand. Demand, that's the demand for cotton. Now, of course, planters and mill owners acquired great wealth due to slave labor. I taught you all about that. Here's the lesson I just taught you. Cotton wears out the land. The problem. And this causes an argument for new western lands. I don't know where your paper is. I think you got it. All right. And this brings us to the next section. And that is about the jobs of the slaves. I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures here in a minute. But slaves did pretty much everything. Everything. The only thing they didn't do is they didn't count money. They did everything else. They cleared the land. They planted, cultivated, harvested, and processed the crop. Does anybody know about the slave workday? What was it? They worked 6 days per week. That's right, rested on Sunday. Of course, some of them worked side jobs. And they worked from sunrise to sunset. What does sunrise, what's that word that means sunrise? Starts with a D. Dawn. To, what's it mean? It's saying dusk. Now, all the slaves worked. Men, women, children worked. Also, sometimes slaves would require special skills that other people would desire, and they would be hired out, and they would pay the owner, the master, to borrow those slaves to work on things. Like some slaves become good carpenters, and others were good at fixing boats. So they would hire them out to do these things. Now, of course, the owner would get paid, not the slaves. Except sometimes on Sunday, a slave might be talented, and he or she could earn money themselves. Now, they were hired out. They cooked, cleaned, they did laundry. They raised the owner's children. Now, of course, as far as the economic value of slaves, what do you think goes there? Slaves, blank, blank. Economic value. They had a high economic value. Okay, they cost lots, a good deal of value. And they were the owner's what? Property. Owners wanted to protect their property. Slaves were not given much freedom or much free time. And even though slaves got married, the marriages were not recognized as legal or binding. So slave families were often broken up. And of course, no learning to read or write, because otherwise you might learn about the North being sympathetic to slaves and try to escape there. I'm going to show you the PowerPoint slides here and go over some of this with you. Does anybody need it yet? Okay, even if you have a missing blank, you should be able to fill it in here. So, slave life in general, and this is just the beginning. Well, I'm sure you'll learn so much about it. They worked in the field and in the plantation house. They cleared the land, planted, cultivated. You know, cultivating's like, does anybody have a garden or anything? Your dad, parents, your mom has a flower garden? Okay, you know, weeds, getting the flowers, you go pull them out. That would be part of cultivating. It's all those little things you got to do to baby your crops to make them grow. You can't just plant them and leave them. You got to go and take the weeds out and all kinds of things. That's all part of cultivation. Harvested, that's actually collecting it and processing it. Well, in the case of rice, which was grown here, like, you don't just trim the rice and put it in a bale and send it off. You got to take the rice has like a little cover on it, like it looks. Yeah, I might actually have some still in the trunk of my car. Wild rice, but you got to take that cover off. So they would do it in like a big mill. So the slaves would work that thing. It would like grind it off. So they did everything. Worked dusk to dawn, 6 days per week. Women and children, well, they worked in the fields alongside the men under the supervision of a driver or overseer. We're going to talk about those at the end of the lesson. Slave life. Some slaves had a wide range of skills and could be hired out by the master, who would then collect the slave's wages. I know I've mentioned this unique case, but he comes up in the next lesson. Does anybody remember about this slave I told you that was a carpenter in Charleston and hit the lottery? No? All right, we'll learn about him in the next section. His name's Denmark Vesey. He was a good carpenter, and he saved money, and he actually bought a lottery ticket and won and bought his freedom. However, later he was accused of trying to lead a slave rebellion and was found guilty and, I believe, put to death. So he got lucky when he hit the lottery, but unlucky because he might not even be guilty of this, leading the slave rebellion. It might have been a more or less they framed him, I'm not sure. But it's a unique case. So on Sundays they could work on their own and make some money. Now, a lot of them, the house slaves, which would be more this would be more desirable than working in the fields, worked in the house. And of course, you would much rather work in the house than be out in the fields. They did the cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, even raising the owner's children, putting them on their lap and burping them or whatever. Now, of course, slaves were a large financial investment. Does anybody remember the modern price the equivalent? Anybody, what? Like how much I said they cost today? I mean, I've read as much as $50,000 today. So, that's for one slave, large financial investment. Owners may have been concerned about their property. Some slaves were treated well, others, the owners were brutal. So, kind of just whoever you ended up with. Of course, they were denied their freedom and forced to work long hours. Slave life, little time for families to grow their own food. Although we learned part of the slave codes that they didn't want them growing their own food, so I don't know what that's doing there. They were provided minimum food, clothing, and shelter. Slave marriages were not recognized. Families were often separated through sale. That's one thing. Did I tell you what famous American owned slaves already and let them go in his will? George Washington. They said that he was a pretty fair slave owner. And they said one of the things George Washington was sure of, and this is kind of why he's got a good reputation, is he would not break up the families of the slaves. Of course, there were laws forbidding slaves to learn to read or write. Now, they also had religion. Slaves were of the Christian religion. And here's the thing. The white church told the slaves to be happy with their place in life. pretty much that it was the Lord's plan that they be slaves. However, in secret prayer meetings, they placed a strong amount of emphasis on freedom. I want to be religiously neutral here, but there's a book in the Bible that is about slaves escaping. Do you know what that one is? Anybody? Yeah, that one. Now, the Bible's a book, and you can read it just like anything. And since they were Christians, that was their book. But they really liked that story, the book of Exodus, about people escaping from freedom. And I learned that from some video. Now, let's talk about the religious thing. Slaves couldn't revolt. So 3 ways that the slaves would show their dissatisfaction was they would slow down their work. Sometimes they would do feigned, which means fake illness. And sometimes they would destroy property, but secretly, because of course you would have been very harshly punished. And we're supposed to teach you this large word that means secret. Surreptitious. Property destruction. Does anybody see a stem in surreptitious? Because I don't know the stems that well. That means secret. Huh? Full of. And which one means secret? Because I don't know this. Is it sir? I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to learn from you here. So, surreptitious property destruction. Now, they have the Christian religion. They found what was called solace in the Christian religion. What's it called if you try to, like, show that you're sorry to someone about a loss they've experienced? It starts with sympathy, yeah, I'm thinking of that, but it's also with a C. There's a C word. Console. Console. You ever hear that word, console? That's to, like, say, I'm very sorry about your loss, whatever. So that's where solace is from. Sorry. And, just like I told you, the white church said for slaves to be content. But in secret meetings, slaves secretly practiced about freedom. And that's where I learned from a video about the book of Exodus being important in their teachings, and for obvious reasons. Okay, I forget what comes up next here. Solace. S-O-L-A-C-E. Now, a lot of people think that if the slaves would get off the plantation, they would be free. But not the case, because the whole South was locked down to them. Just like, to make a parallel between, I hate to do it, but Nazi Germany. Were the Jewish people ever safe? No. They might even escape the camp or wherever they were being detained, but it was locked down to them. Same thing in the South. Now, I'm going to show you why, and I just learned a few things today. One of the main reasons that it was locked down, first of all, let's go through this. So, slaves protested through work slowdowns, surreptitious property destruction, feigned illnesses, and of course there were few slave revolts. What was the slave revolt we learned about in Charleston that caused an increase in slave codes? That's it. Stono Rebellion. Now, if you remember, there was a big example set of the Stono Rebellion where most of the slaves that were involved were executed as a warning that revolt equals death. So, they were very scared of that. Now, why they were mainly locked down was because of the whole culture and system in the South. And one of the things is they had people always looking for them. And these people pretty much rode around on a horse like a police and checked for escaped slaves, checked their passes, asked them questions. And these were called slave patrollers. So, of course, a slave that ran away was called a runaway. And these slave patrollers would be out here looking for slaves. They better have a pass. And of course, if a slave ran away and was captured, there would have been harsh punishment for the slave. In the form of whipping or something. So, now I just learned this today, what I'm about to show you, and that is, this was a very official job, because I was looking for a picture of another reason slaves couldn't escape, is they had, like, dogs, bloodhounds, that they have such a high, what's that called, sense of smell that they can differentiate between all these smells and find someone. It's amazing, their ability. But they'll give a piece of the escaped slave's clothing to the dog, let it smell it, and go, fine, and the dog can do it. It's unreal. So I was looking for a picture of a dog chasing slaves. Okay, here's where we are about patrollers. If the slaves left the plantation, they had to carry a pass. Patrollers roamed the roads looking for slaves. The slave cabins were close to the owner's home, but I'm going to get in that in a minute. This is what I found today, which was crazy. They had official badges. What county is it from? Georgetown County. Yeah. Now that's where Brook Green Gardens was. It was a coastal, on the coast. It's probably considered the low country. But yeah, I mean, even these patrollers, like the guy just drew on a horse, they were official, almost police. Now, like I said about the dogs, I just found this picture, I liked it. It was a slave family escaping. Those dogs, you can chase them down. They had that guy cornered in a tree. I thought I had another one. Oh well, perhaps not. Because now, the next part of this lesson, which, man, I'm going to have to stop. I didn't think this was going to take that long, was about, I might as well finish. The owner's house and the proximity of the slave quarters to the owner's house. Anybody know what the owner's house is called?
No, there's not.
It was called the Big House. And anybody know what the owner of the plantation was called? The what? Starts with an M. The master. Now, this is about different roles of the master and mistress. Oh, I gave it away. And make him very, I can't put a smile on the master's face. It just seems wrong. Although he probably was happy because he had a lot of money. So, now the slave cabins were right next to the big house. Why? Because they wanted to keep their eye on their slaves because they were such valuable property. On my slaves so they don't escape or run away. But run away. Now, the main job of the master was to manage the slave population. And if you're a manager, you're not really taken care of, but you're making sure that you have enough slaves and they're doing what they're supposed to do. And what's it called if you sell something? Because you had to sell the crop. What's the place where you buy stuff called? Market. He markets the crop. And the slaves can't leave without a pass. Now, what's my name for my stereotypical slaveholder? Mr. Headright. Good job, because the Headright method led to the formation of large plantations. Now, the owner's wife I call Mrs. Headright. She is called, I don't know, that's true, the mistress. Now, what did the mistress do? Well, the mistress ran the house and cared for sick or ill slaves. And Mrs. Headright was clear to point out to those northern mill owners that the fact that she cares for the sick was much better than their treatment of their workers. So, even though they're our property, we care about them better than those heartless northern mill owners who don't care at all about their workers. Remember, that was the argument. I'm not saying that this was good or anything. And of course, Mrs. Headright would have said, slavery is, do you remember what they told the northern mill owners? It was a literary genius thing. What was it? Slavery is a positive good. Because we care for our slaves. I even take care of the sick ones. While you don't care for your factory workers. Now, that's the end of the writing part, but I think I'm going to show you some of this stuff. I already showed you this picture of the slave plantation, but the main reason I wanted to show it to you here was because to show you the proximity of the slave quarters to the big house. Then, I wanted to show you the big house again. Then I wanted to show you the slave quarters again. And then I wanted to read it. Those are the slave cabins. Something I forgot on your notes, but it's no big deal. They had dirt floors. They were the most meager of accommodations. They wanted to keep the slaves alive so they could work and make them money, but they're not going to splurge when it comes to their comfort. The master handled business, selling of the crop, managing the slaves. The mistress, the owner's wife, oversaw the running of the house, cared for sick slaves, and now to the overseer, which was hired to help watch over slaves. There was also a slave driver. Now, according to the South Carolina standards, you don't have to differentiate between them, but I am going to do it for you. Anyway, the slave driver was actually a slave who was put in charge of his fellow slaves on the plantation. And sometimes the slave driver was forced to inflict punishments. When I looked it up, I found several pictures, or drawings more so, of a slave whipping other slaves. Now, and he was separated from his community. This is some other guy's PowerPoint, I don't know. It's about to come up. This looks to me like an overseer, because the overseer was a white person that was in charge of the slaves. So the hierarchy goes, and I'll show this to you in a moment. It went, okay, when I looked this up, I thought, this to me looks like an African American, so it would be a driver. Now, I don't think that's a real picture. I think it's better that the overseer would be on a horse looking over. I mean, he would be like, to compare it to the school, it's real easy. Who's the master in the school? Yeah. Okay. Now, the overseers would be like, who? Yeah, that's right, our assistant principals. And now, me, I'm kind of like the slave. I'm the driver, and I'm sorry, but y'all are the lowest level in the school. You would be the slaves in comparison. That's true, and that's not actually true, because you have way more rights than slaves. But here's the hierarchy. Of course, it was the master, mistress. Then comes the overseers that were the white people, like the managers. Then below that is like the trusted employees that are over top of them, called drivers. Now, the drivers were actually slaves. And,
So you're a driver.
yeah, I'm a slave sort of. And last would be the slaves. Now, granted, it's not true, because none of us are property, and I can quit anytime I want and leave. Of course, I like my job, so I'm going to do that. And y'all have way more rights than slaves. But if you make a comparison between the school, it would be as it said. Now, the whole point I want to tell you was about the drivers and the overseers. Okay, that concludes the lesson on slavery. Is there any questions? All right.